don't expect, and because of that, we find egg on our faces. I'll explain that a little further later, but first a story about two well-known preachers of yesteryear. Harold Hocking-Gay was the pastor of Park Street Church in Boston. Donald Gray Barnhouse was the pastor of the Great Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. They were friends, and they decided on one occasion they would preach sort of a round-robin series of evenings together for 30 days. And that month of time would be spent from Boston all the way down to First Presbyterian Church of Pittsburgh, where Clarence McCartney was the pastor. Anyway, they would swap off each night. One would go first, the first night, the other would go second. The following night, the one who was second would go first, and it would go back and forth. So they began the cycle, and they were in one church after another. Barnhouse learned quickly that Harold Hocking-Gay would preach the very same sermon night after night. Barnhouse brought a different sermon every night for 29 nights. But he figured early on, the last night he would come first. So he memorized Harold Hocking-Gay's sermon. Listened to it night after night, got down everything: introduction, illustrations, transitions, points, conclusion. He nailed it. So when it came time for that final night, Barnhouse stood first to preach, and he delivered Hocking-Gay's message word perfect. Dr. Hocking-Gay sat down near the front, arms folded, listened without changing his expression whatever. Didn't look surprised, didn't shake his head, just sat there and listened. Barnhouse was having the time of his life, knowing that the man was struggling to know what he would do when he stood up. His turn came, and Hocking-Gay stood and delivered a completely different message than he had delivered the other nights of the conference. Barnhouse was blown away. As the lights dimmed and everybody had left and the two men were walking out the middle aisle, Barnhouse leaned over and said, "They kind of liked your sermon I preached tonight, didn't they?" Hocking-Gay said with a twinkle, "Not nearly as much as they enjoyed it when I preached it here 4 months ago." Every preacher has his embarrassing moment. Mine came on the way to chapel today when I realized that the message I planned to preach, I preached here 98 days ago. And yet, most of you won't even remember it. I started to say, let's see a show of hands to tell me, were you here and do you remember what I talked about? I talked about 2 words. And so now that I'm wiping egg off my face, I am scrambling to say the same thing in a little different way. Maybe by saying them in the same semester, it will land home and you will never forget the 2 words. You've heard the words since you were in Sunday school. You have heard these professors remind you of them, both in words of warning as well as words of encouragement, and maybe even a few testimonies about how the words came to their rescue. The words appear in Scripture in one way or another hundreds of times, and you will use the words with others in your ministry, both from the pulpit as well as a counselor, a friend, a minister of music. Whatever capacity you'll serve in, on mission field or here at home, you'll use these 2 words. And they are, trust God. 2 single-syllable words that you have heard forever. But you will discover as time passes how difficult they are to obey. Trust God. Mark DeMoss, in a little book that most of you will never read since it's so elementary, titled The Little Red Book of Wisdom, writes, I will never forget standing on the lawn in my pajamas at 2 a.m. that Memorial Day weekend, watching with my family in disbelief as flames gutted our large English tutor to a stone shell. By dawn, everything we possessed was lump or ash. I was 10 years old and was the first to escape the inferno, having sleepwalked, they told me, down the stairs and outside on my own. A fireman saw me shivering in the early morning autumn air and wrapped a blanket around me, while one of his colleagues was gently but urgently coaxing my sister to jump from the second floor window into his arms. The scene was chaotic, lonely and crowded at the same time. For a week or so, we lived with friends, and then we bought school clothes, rented a house for 9 months before moving again. I shake my head to think that long before home alarms were standard, all 9 of us awoke from deep sleep and escaped virtually unharmed. Plenty of fire stories end differently, DeMoss adds. One recent Halloween night, my friend Bruce and his wife took their kids through their neighborhood while Bruce's father-in-law stayed behind to pass out candy to trick-or-treaters. Bruce and his family returned to find their home ablaze, too late to save his children's grandfather. Next day, when I walked around Bruce's charred lot, the smell of sodden ashes shot me back 30 years to my own family's tragedy. Good insurance policies can replace bricks and furniture, and families can rebuild. But no policy can replace the loss of life or special possessions. Irreplaceable losses have more to do with family value than market value. Of course, I have no way of knowing what the future holds for you. You may lose your home and everything in a fire. You may lose your spouse to an early disease, detected but not cured. You may lose your dreams, your hopes. You may lose a relationship that you have cultivated over the years. All losses are painful. And you will be brought back over and over again to the words of Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. I know. You memorized them in Vacation Bible School or when you were growing up at the knee of a godly mother and or father, and your lips will move as I quote them. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. All your heart, all your ways. Trust. Trust. Now, we have a problem with this because of several things. First of all, we are to blame self-sufficient. We have learned how to get ourselves out of jams rather than acknowledging the jam has very well been either directed or permitted by our sovereign God to teach us. And by not trusting him, we short-circuit the test and go our own way, getting ourselves out of our own mess. We're too self-sufficient. Another reason we fail this test is because we're too quick to call on others. We have a lot of very capable friends. As life unfolds and you leave this school and you're involved in your church, your work of ministry, your realm of responsibility, you'll meet other people. Many of them much smarter than you are. Most of them richer than you are. Better connected than you are. And some of them will become good friends. And they will become your crutch. You'll trust them rather than the Lord your God. Because they're right there and they have connections. And when you're up against it, they'll get you through it. Another reason we don't trust is because we feel distant from the God of heaven. Don't feel too guilty about that. So did Job, as godly as he was. And yet Job said, in the midst of all of the loss, though he slay me, I will trust in him. Though he take me off this earth, in the process, I leave trusting him. I will trust him. The fourth reason I would name is that we have cultivated the bad habit of worry. Many of you are much better at worrying than you are at trusting. If you were to put together a worry list, it would outrun your prayer list. And you're worried right now about something. Most likely, it's related to something about your schoolwork, some course, some class, some test, or maybe your finances. You don't have enough money. I'll give you a word of encouragement. You'll never have enough money. So you're worried now, you're getting good at it, so you can carry that with you when you graduate, because you won't have enough money then. So you're worried about that. And you do not trust God. See how practical it is? And if you think you're going to outgrow the problem, take it from this old guy today, you won't ever outgrow it. It's like lust. You never outgrow lust. You just learn to fake it. I remember attending a Navigator conference when Lawrence Sandy was president. We were at Glen Eyrie and they had a returned missionary, I think an 87, 88-year-old gentleman who Lauren brought up to the platform, and he was a long-time navigator. And Lauren said, "Tell me, Dr. So-and-so, when did you conquer lust?" The old man said, "Well, Lauren, hasn't happened yet." You'll never conquer worry. It's part of the flesh. You want to, but the only way you will get through it so that you will learn from the test is to trust. To trust. To put the worry on hold, to set it aside, deliberately shoving it away and saying, "God, at this moment, I rest in you and you alone." If you're married, God, help my spouse and me to trust you, to lean on you, to wait on you, to listen to you, to endure the test with you. I put together a quick list of things that reveal how little we trust. When you choose to worry, you do not trust. When you try to fix what is impossible, you do not trust. When you hurry ahead and don't wait for the Lord to move and to change, you do not trust. When you lie awake twisting and turning at night, you do not trust. When you doubt biblical principles and promises that are right here in the book you love and study, you do not trust. When you turn to others first for help, you do not trust. When you listen to human counsel and give a higher priority to that than the principles you have just learned, you do not trust. When you manipulate and maneuver situations, you do not trust. When you step in and take charge without praying and being led by the Spirit of God, you do not trust. When you cling to others in order to feel secure and needed and loved, you do not trust. The list goes on and on. See how easy it is to live in the flesh, how easy it is to disobey. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Wouldn't it be a great project over the Christmas season this year to think through ways that you can begin to trust God regardless? Hopefully it'll be a project that you and a good friend or you and your mate can enter together. What is it we do that keep us from trusting God? And how can we break that habit and watch God break through in ways that we would never have expected? Cynthia and I have a longtime friend who was raised with 4 brothers in southwest Texas. They were raised on a very poor ranch. They eked out a living. One of the brothers wound up getting into Baylor, going on to UCLA Law School, and earning his degree in law, and has since become a very fine attorney in the Southern California area. We've been friends since the mid-1970s. One of his 4 brothers stayed at the ranch and developed it, cultivated it. The other brothers moved away, as did our friend. And the one who stayed, along with his wife, really turned the ranch into something much more successful. Grew crops that worked, got cattle, bred them, sold them. Little by little, kind of got on their feet and finally became pretty much financially stable. Then the fires of 2011 across Texas swept through their area. And they came to that ranch. By now they knew they would lose all the cattle. They simply opened the gate, and amazingly those animals know where to go, usually know where to go to find shelter and safety. And they fled, hundreds of them. And they barely left, unable to get much of anything in their pickup, and they drove away. Came back a number of days later when allowed to enter this territory, and everything was melted. Everything. Even the metal roof on the shed, on the barn, had melted down and sort of peeled its way over, and what it landed on, it kind of was that metal profile. As everything is lost. All possessions, all pictures, thankfully no lives. Strangely, the cattle got back and were clustered around in a herd around an enormous oak tree, and they were able to get them back. Of course, the fence had burned, so that has to be rebuilt. And they said to one another, we realized at that moment our faith would either kick into action or we would move far away from the God we had loved and served. They chose the former. They determined they would rebuild. They're in the process right now. Living with a brother, putting house and home back together, having lost it all. Several weeks ago, a couple in our church came to see me. She is probably in her late 30s. He is same age. She has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She's by now lost all of her hair through the treatments. They have 2 small children. Here sat her husband. Here sat this lovely woman, his wife. As they spoke to me in the most encouraging manner. I'm in tears. They're smiling. What an interesting reversal of roles. I'm the guy that's supposed to have the answers. And they sit here and they minister to me as I've rarely been ministered to, talking about what God is teaching them in the midst of the loss. Now, all of that will sound hollow if you're cynical, and some of you are, tragically. But if you still have a heart, you will realize that's where you want to be. When the doctor says it's your wife, or your husband, or your mom or dad, or you. Something happened in their lives somewhere that they determined they would trust God with all their heart and lean not to their own understanding. I asked the husband straight out, don't you lay awake at night wondering where all of this is going? And his response was an immediate, oh yeah, there are nights like that. Then tears came as he said, I can't imagine living without the greatest woman on earth. I mean, this is real life stuff. And I put my arms around both of them at the end and told them how much they mean to me, to us as a church. She still has stage 4 cancer. We prayed. We talked about prayer in the midst of this. We discussed a future without her and the possibility of how God has the ability to heal her, can heal her, may heal her, and may not. He said, to be honest with you, my greatest fear is knowing these children would be raised just by me. Because without this mom, I can't imagine how I'm going to be able to do that. True, honest words. But I trust God. I trust God. How good is that? Their circumstance hasn't changed. Unless God breaks through, the cancer will ultimately take its toll. And they trust God. And should the Lord choose not to heal her, and I have her funeral, I am confident his words to me will be through tears, I am trusting God on where to go from here. That's what I'm talking about, men and women. And being in ministry will not make you immune to tests like this. Getting your training here at this fine school will not in any way separate you from real world stuff. Count on it. One of your children, some close friend, some classmate, or you. So what do you do if it's you? we do? I turn finally and quickly to 1 Samuel chapter 30. If you remember 98 days ago, we were here, but you probably don't. The man in question is David. He has just left the ranks of the Philistines. He's in the rear ranks along with Achish, who tells him the Philistines don't like having you and the Hebrews around. You need to go back. Philistines had granted them Ziklag where they could live. And so he and his men, having fought, weary from battle, dirty, sweaty, tired, have about a 3.5 day walk back to Ziklag. I don't know what their future will be. He's still hunted and haunted by Saul, the king. And so they come to what was their home. Must have been a rugged place. They've been living there about a year, year and a half. My figuring is correct. Verse 1, don't you love the first 3 words? Then it happened. Then it happened. In other words, out of the blue, unexpectedly, the shock of what they were about to see was just over the hill. When David and his men came to Ziklag on the 3rd day, the Amalekites had made a raid on the Negev and on Ziklag and had overthrown Ziklag and burned it with fire. That's bad enough, because that meant all of their homes were gone. Next verse. Then it happened, they realized that the Amalekites had taken captive the women and all who were in it, in the village, small and great, meaning the children, without killing anyone, and carried them off and went their way. They didn't know no one was killed. All they knew was the place was vacant. It was smoldering ruins. All of the tents were down, and it was, you could hear the wind whistle through the bushes. It must have been horrible. Verse 3, when David and his men came to the city, behold, it was burned with fire. Wives, sons, and daughters have been taken captive. Now, before you think David is living in denial, please observe his response. David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until there was no strength in them to weep. Never think that trusting God means you do not weep. Please learn not to say to people who have lost someone near and dear to them, let's not cry, we're trusting God. We don't weep as those who have no hope, but we weep. I can't experience loss without tears, especially if the loss hits me deeply. They lifted up their voices and they wept till there was no strength in them to weep anymore. Now David, his wives had been taken captive. Verse 6, David was greatly distressed. I hope I'm not going too far. I believe the Hebrew word would include the idea of depressed. The man slumps into a time of depression. I mean, he's lost his wife. He's lost his kids. They've lost theirs. And if that isn't bad enough, he was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him. These are his own troops. This is his staff. If all the men were there, this is 600 of these warriors that he's trained since the cave of Adullam. These are his guys. And they spoke of stoning him, for all were embittered, each one because of his sons and daughters. Why didn't you think ahead, David? You're the commander in chief. Why would we leave them without protection? What were we thinking? You're the leader here. Well, you'll go through that too, by the way. That's all part of the job. It just isn't written in the job description. And there will be those who will turn on you when you have nothing to do with what has happened, but you're the scapegoat. You're the target. You live with a bullseye on your chest. And all of them looked at David and turned against him at that. There was mutiny, or almost. Then we read the best part of the story in the latter half of verse 6. But David strengthened himself in the Lord, his God. How good is that? How did he do it? You know how he did it. I know how he did it. It's just hard to do it. I lost my wife. I lost my kids. I'm losing their trust. Oh, God. Maybe he remembered a song he wrote, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Though a host encamp against me, I will not fear." Oh God, you have come through in the life of Moses. You came through in the life of Abraham. You came through in the life of Joseph and the brothers. You can come through now, and I refuse to run or panic. I trust you, oh God. That's one thing to say that, and I'll tell you, it's a whole different deal to do it. It was a number of years ago, our older daughter was diagnosed with a very difficult eye problem. Carissa's eye, she was born, wandered. It moved in and out around, and as she got to school, by then she was wearing very thick lenses, especially the one on the bad eye. And of course the kids made fun of her, and it was miserable, and she would come home crying. And finally Cynthia and I looked at each other and we said, look, we got to deal with this. I said, I do know an ophthalmologist, and maybe he can help. So we went to Dr. Jack Cooper, who was then practicing, and he said, well, let me tell you, first of all, it's a child's eye. So I'm working in very, very confined area. You need to know there are muscles that hold the eye, and I'll have to guess on how much to stretch and which one to move. But I want you to know I'll do the first of several surgeries. We were, by the way, moving then from Irving to California, and so we had to change doctors in the middle of the stream. Well, he did his work. It resulted in something that was not the best, but it was a little better. The lens was a little bit thinner, and yet she was still struggling. The eye would simply cross, or it would move out, and that didn't get resolved. So we got to California, and we found a pediatric ophthalmologist. All right. That simply means he charges more for the work of ophthalmology because he specializes in little kids' eyes. So we meet with him. He is absolutely brilliant. He's recording everything, and he talks in the gobbledygook that medical doctors talk in, but he said, you need to know. And I thought, I've been here before. You need to know. It's a guess. And I thought, all this money I'm paying you, pal? Guess right. But I didn't say that. So Carissa went under the knife again. And he said, please don't worry when she comes out because there things may not be as you expect. But I expect a full fusion, ultimately. And I thought, it's got to be right, man. I got a great God, and we have prayed to him, and we've got a darling little girl here, and I'm tired of her being embarrassed, and it's going to be right. And so, Lord, got it? So I'm standing over. Carissa, open your eyes. And Cynthia said, back off. I said, I am backed off. Open your eye, honey. Let Daddy see your eye. And so she just barely coming out of anesthesia, and she opens her eye, and the pupil is looking directly at the bridge of her nose. Almost all white. Well, I'm telling you, something happened inside me that I'm almost ashamed to admit. I thought, well, fine. That's great. Thanks, God. I left her. She said, where are you going? I said, I don't know. Get out of the way. So I got in the car and I drove and went back to my study and locked the front door and locked the back door and put a sign, don't disturb, and told the secretary to go home and sat there in the dark. And I heard, I didn't want to answer. So it was my friend who had heard about all of this. I said, what? He said, oh, you're there. And I opened the door and I said, I don't want to talk to you. He said, well, I want to talk to you. And I said, I don't want to listen to you. He said, well, let's just get together, buy you a hamburger, and let's sit out at the park. What I didn't know is that he had teamed up with a buddy of mine who was an artist. And they had it all arranged. When they left, he was going to turn around and make sure the door was unlocked so his buddy could come in and draw me something. So I'm sitting at this park bench eating a In-N-Out burger and crying like a baby. He's so gracious with me, so understanding. He said, you know, Chuck, this isn't the end. I mean, you haven't even given her. I says, I know that. I can finish every sentence you start. Oh. In the meantime, my buddy is in my study at the church drawing me a big poster. So I finished with my friend Earl and get him to leave me alone. I walk back in and turn the light on it. There's the poster. It's a big picture of a monk. Robe. Funny haircut. Big old toes sticking out his sandals. Caricature. At the bottom. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. We're not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. Dost ask who this may be? Christ Jesus, it is he, Lord Sabaoth his name, from age to age the same, and he must win the battle. And I sobbed like I haven't cried in my adult life when I realized how unbelieving I had been. He will win the battle. He will win the battle. It'll be his battle. And I'll simply enjoy the spoils of his victory. I kept that poster for years. Thank the artist friend for painting it for me. Every time I sing A Mighty Fortress, I think of that. Several weeks later, Carissa was home, and from that day till today, straight on fusion. Eyes as straight. She doesn't even need glasses. I'm the guy in the thick glasses now. She doesn't need any glasses. And the Lord taught me through my shameful response. He'll win this battle. Trust him. Trust me. Trust God. It's so sweet to trust in Jesus. Just to take him at his word. Just to rest upon his promises. Just to know, thus saith the Lord. Trust God. Say it. Trust God. Do it again. Trust God. Father, we have no idea what the test will be tomorrow, next week, this new year. in the decade to come, should your Son tarry. With our family, with our friends, we do not know. But we do not confide in our own strength, but in the one who wins the battle for us.